Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal, a production out of great YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. And today, I am finally getting around to reviewing Violence Unimagined, the 15th studio album from Florida death metal legends Cannibal Corpse. So, without further ado, let me get into my overall thoughts on Violence Unimagined. Okay, so before I really get into any of my thoughts on this particular album, you know what I have to do. I have to do a track listing rundown so I can tell you folks where the songs are on this album, how many songs are on this album, and what's the time length for this album. And since we have at least about 11 songs here, it all clocks in at 42 minutes and 48 seconds. So, these 11 songs are beginning with Murderous Rampage, Necrogenic Resurrection, Inhumane Harvest, Condemnation Contagion, Surround Kill Devour, Ritual Annihilation, Follow the Blood, Bound and Burned, Slowly Sawn, Over Torture, and then finally ending with Cerements of the Flayed. So there's your 11 songs. So, also kind of address it. This is pretty much the first album with producer Eric Rutan being playing a pivotal part on this album because of, again, not just is he a producer for this album, but he's also one of the musicians on it. Actually, he's one of the main guitar players on here who provides plenty of the solos on this one, and maybe even some rhythm parts, but for the most part, he is a legitimate band member for this album, and it is his first as a band member, because he is replacing Pat O'Brien on guitar, which, just to kind of address it, Pat O'Brien, back in 2018, was a fucking idiot. And to this day, he is still a fucking idiot, and Eric Rutan has pretty much replaced him. And that's where I leave it there, because I don't want to go into all the details on why Pat O'Brien was a fucking idiot. But he sure was, and he's definitely paying for it. Again, if you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and Pat O'Brien definitely won the stupidest prize of them all, because he played one of the stupidest games ever. So that'll just leave it there. So, from here, this of course does follow 2017's Red Before Black, which that album, Red Before Black, also preceded 2014's A Skeletal Domain, which still, in my opinion, remains one of Cannibal Corpse's finest albums, especially from the Corpse Grinder Fisher era. But Red Before Black was a pretty good follow-up to A Skeletal Domain, though not nearly as great, or not nearly as amazing as A Skeletal Domain, but it was still a fine album in its own right. This album right here, Violence Unimagined, it pretty much follows the same sort of, I guess you can say, formula. At this point, I mean, Cannibal Corpse has been nothing short but at least consistent in their discography, save for at least one other guy who I really don't want to really mention, but again, I'm not referring to Pat O'Brien. I'm referring to another guy from the sort of Cannibal Corpse family tree who, to this day, kind of very, very sad and depressed in that lane right there. But I'll just leave it there. But again, Cannibal Corpse has been nothing short but at least consistent, and Violence Unimagined is a consistently good album from at least beginning to end. I mean, it begins with one of the most ferocious songs, really, with Murderous Rampage. Again, it opens up the album in fine, vicious form, and from there on, you get plenty of at least a bunch of chainsaw, buzzsaw, fucking driven death metal songs. But besides still plenty of really fast and ferocious chainsaw-ridden death metal songs, like, for example, Murderous Rampage, Necrogenic Resurrection, even to a little bit there, Inhumane Harvest, but into, again, Surround, Kill, Devour, to, of course, here and there, a little bit of Follow the Blood, Bound and Burn, and then Over Torture, which are definitely the album's prime, just primal, barbaric, chainsaw like death metal songs, which are just are at least pretty much driven by them chaotic blast beats and just straight up them really fast guitar riffs and everything. Again, all at least at freaking warp speed. But the album itself, besides having some of those great energetic songs, for the most part, this is almost more of a mid-paced, at times very slower, almost groove-based kind of album. Because again, it's definitely heard in songs like, for example, Be Like Follow the Blood, or Into Ritual Annihilation, or at least Condemnation, Contagion, and those songs. Maybe like Solely Sonic, of course, the very last song, Cerements of the Flay, which are really kind of examples of the more really almost slower groove-based kind of mid-paced style sort of death metal songs on here. Again, you got plenty of the sort of rapidly fast, ferocious, barbaric songs, but you also have plenty, at least, of these. And to kind of be honest, I don't think they're the more interesting parts of the album. I mean, I love to me, the best moments for the album for me are the ones that are just go straight into it, straight to the jugular, rip you by the throat type of death metal songs, like again Murderous Rampage and Necrogenic Resurrection, Surround, Kill, Devour, and Bound and Burn, and Overtorture, which are pretty much some of the album's strongest songs. But some of the more slower ones I feel like are not nearly the strongest parts of the album. They're fine. They keep the album in a way kind of flowing and keep it without being too completely samey, but at the same time I don't think they add much to the album, and I feel if anything they're not the more interesting ones. So I don't want to try and say that I dislike the album. It's just that to me personally they're not my favorite ones. Actually, I think Condemnation Contagion might be the weakest song on the entire album. There's something about it that doesn't do much for me. Same thing from at least Follow the Blood, where it begins at least very fast and ferocious, but then from there on it changes a complete different pace, and from there on it kind of almost stays in that same pace, and it's not really that interesting. So if anything, Condemnation Contagion and Follow the Blood are probably the two of the album's weakest points for it. But for the most part, it's still plenty of solid song with at least some really good fucking at least fast and ferocious death metal songs. But for the most part, I think it's kind of at least just a little bit mundane in some parts. Again, it's not nearly as interesting as the previous two albums, especially not nearly as great as a Skeletal Domain, which is still, again, one account Cannibal Corpse's best albums from this era, and it's far, and it seems like that this album, it hasn't really lived up to that album. It's again, they're kind of almost back a little bit in the sort of same wheelhouse that they have been stuck in, at least since maybe prior to a Skeletal Domain, but not to say that any other albums before it were bad, it's just that nothing really stood out much. But Skeletal Domain was one of the most standout albums from their discography, and this one, while again it's still fine and it's still great, it's just that it's not nearly as great as that. So this might be, of the three albums, to me personally, I feel like Violence Unimagined might be the weakest of these three albums, but this is still a fine album, so that's where I'm at. I mean, the Eric Rutan's production is warm and very chainsaw written. My God, the guitar tone on here is pretty much the same as the previous two albums, but maybe a lot more buzzier in a way, but it still comes off warmth and very raw and disgusting in a way, and in all the best ways. But just musically and on a writing point, some of this is not nearly the strongest material I think the band has put together on an album for a while here. It seems like it is probably the least of the strongest stuff, but it's still good in its own right, and I still enjoy it. So, there we go. There it is, folks. There's my overall thoughts on Violence Unimagined from Cannibal Corpse, and just to give you my rating, I'm giving it a 8.95 out of 10. Again, it's a fine, solid album. It's still 8.95 is still, I think, a high enough score for this album, but again, compared to the other two, especially a Skeletal Domain, this, which I would have probably give a Skeletal Domain close to at least, maybe 100 or so, at least, or a 10 out of 10, because it was a fucking great album. And Red Before Black was, again, probably, again, a notch below, but it was still would have been in the sort of 9 point whatever rating. That's why I feel it's like, while this is still a high enough rating for the sound, it still means that it's still compared to those two, the rating is just a little bit lower than those, just because of just the way I feel towards this album. It's not groundbreaking. It doesn't really move me as much as those other two albums did, especially again, hey, 8th Repeat again, but a Skeletal Domain. But this is still a solid enough album, and it's still consistent. It's still fine. So that's all. That's where I'm at. Again, it's a fine album from these guys, but it's not their strongest. Nor again, it's not their best album, but it still is a good album. So again, this album has been out since April 16th. So I know all of you probably have heard this album. So if you have any sort of thoughts, whether it be positive or negative, you can leave them in the comment section below. So without further ado, let me get into my closing thoughts, or basically just my closing lines. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.